All right, we'll go ahead and get started. If more people come, that's awesome. But I actually have a lot I want to talk about today, so we can't just sit around and wait. All right, welcome to Found in Translation. We're going to be working on expanding our understanding of biblical words. And this is what I would call a methodology class, not a content class. Hey, Mitchell, come on in. Hey, guys.
Hey,
come on in.
sorry.
You're fine.
We were socializing.
So in other words, we're going to be learning how to do something, not necessarily just like a bunch of information. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. So over the course of the next 13-ish weeks, we're going to be gaining tools and practicing using those tools for how to expand our understanding of biblical words. And I chose that word on purpose because I don't want to imply ever in this class that we've misunderstood the Bible. I don't think that we have. Hey, Katie, you're fine. What I do think is there's a ton that we're missing because we don't speak ancient Greek or Hebrew and we didn't live in those cultures and all of that. So we're going to work on trying to expand and deepen our understanding, to build on what we've already got. So in some ways, I think that what we're going to do today is the most important session of this class, because we're going to lay some groundwork, we're going to develop some common vocabulary, I'm going to explain why I think these tools will be useful in the first place, and I don't know if the rest of the class will make sense if you haven't been here today. But on the other hand, this might be the least important session, because we're not actually going to use any of the tools that we're going to be getting through the rest of the class. So I'm glad you're here. I think it's really important that we start here, but please come back next week, because that's when we're going to start getting into the meat and the nitty-gritty of what we're doing. I promise this is a Bible class. There's going to be some times today where it might not feel like this is a Bible class. Bear with me. Again, I think that it's important that we're going to start with this before we can kind of get into the deep end of what we're going to be doing later. So I'm going to start with what is kind of a silly premise, and I realize that it's kind of silly. Words are magic. And I've got a couple of silly examples to back up this premise. So what I mean by that is that, one, words are powerful, but also words are not scientific. They're not easy, simple, one-to-one. You can't nail them down. It's all kind of nebulous, you'll see what I mean as we go, right? So I've got two kind of silly examples that I have to back up this premise. The first one is a poem, and hopefully you're not thinking, oh no, I'm back in English class, I've picked the wrong room. I know you're not, because you told me before words are your thing. But the poem we're going to read is a poem by Lewis Carroll. Is anyone familiar with Lewis Carroll?
I know which poem. Yep.
I bet you do, yeah. What is Lewis Carroll most known for, if you are familiar with him? Alice in Wonderland, that's right, yes. So what poem are we going to be reading, Lori? You said you know it.
It's a weird name.
It is weird. Do you know it?
Jabberwocky.
Jabberwocky, yes. You may have read this poem in high school. We're going to read it. I'm going to read it. And then as we read, I want you to ask yourself two questions. First question, do I understand this poem? Second question, if I do, how is it that I'm able to understand it? And then we'll talk after we read it, okay? So here we go. Here's the poem. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O Frabjous Callooh, Callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the momraths outgrabe. So, who thinks they understand this poem? Then you know what it's talking about. Okay. Do you think anyone think they could like summarize it? Tell what's this about? Katie?
I have no idea. I'm sure everyone else in here knows.
Okay.
Probably, but this is what I got from it.
What do you think this is about?
The Jabberwock is something that people fear.
Right.
So the main character
Mm-hmm.
has waited and hidden to catch the Jabberwock offhand
Yep.
to slay him and save his people. And so he did that. Hooray, everyone can carry on as normal because he's prevented the Jabberwock from
Yes.
taking over the land.
Yes. It's actually very simple. This is a very familiar story. It's an adventure story. We have a normal state of affairs that makes no sense, right? And then suddenly there's a threat. So our hero goes and he fights the threat and he wins. And then we're back to our normal state of affairs at the end. Yeah? This is like every adventure story you've ever heard in your life. It's a nonsense poem. 25% of the words in this poem, exactly 1/4, Lewis Carroll just made up. You've never heard him before unless you've read the Jabberwocky before. And yet, Katie knows what this is about, right? And that is because your brain knows what to do with completely unfamiliar words if they're in a familiar enough context. Yeah? It's magic. You figure it out, right? So let's think about this. How is it that we were able to understand this? How did you get there, Katie?
He's in the context.
That's a big one. Big one, yeah? So,
references that have like normal words that you can kind of compare.
right, so it is 3/4 words that you know, right? Yes, there's context, right? So I don't know what, let me pick a different one here, right? I don't know what Vorpal is, right? But I know it applies to a sword, right? So I have some idea of what's going on here, right?
You also got the giant cultural association that you have with all those adventure stories that you've had throughout your past.
Yes, if you'd never heard of Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever, this might make a little less sense than it does to us. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, you've got word endings and things like did, gyre, and gimble, and what, so gyre or jar and gimble, they're verbs.
Right.
You did do something, and slithy is an adjective,
Yep.
hellish is an adjective.
Yes. Yeah. So the made-up words still conform to English conventions. Yeah. They're not totally off the wall random, right? It's not just whiffle. It's whiffling, right? I recognize that ing, right? I know that that's a verb. Yeah. Anything else? There's one more thing that I think is kind of helpful.
Maybe just the form of it, the layout, the
Okay.
kind of rhyming,
Sure.
just the
Yeah.
structure
The
of
poetic
poem.
structure. You could say that.
We're familiar with
Absolutely.
that. I don't know.
Is it also onomatopoeia, where words sound like what it might be, burbled and...
Yes. Yes. So burbled, I think, is a great example. I've never heard this word, but it kind of sounds like bubble or gurgle, right? I can hear whatever a Jabberwock is, it's foaming at the mouth when it comes, right? That's the image I get. I've never heard burble before, but it's kind of intuitive, right? So
The galump is a word.
no, it's not.
Galump is not a word.
Gallop is a word. Limp is a word. Galumph. If he's carrying the Jabberwock's head, I kind of get this image of him,
Yeah.
Yeah. So words have like vibes, like a flavor to them. Even if we don't know what they mean, we can kind of get an idea. And so all of that's going on up here, and it just becomes more obvious when we look at something that's unfamiliar. Okay, that's silly example number 1. Silly example number 2. This is a post from the internet that I thought was funny, but is also, I think, useful. So someone comes up and they say, any noun can become a verb as long as you don't care enough. Yeah? And somebody, I think very, very validly says, hey, you have to do that in your post for it to make sense. So the original poster comes back and says, I can sentence how I want. Right? Yeah? Other people start to jump in. Someone says, I like to velociraptor around my house at 2 a.m. Hopefully that's like a child, not like a middle-aged man or something. Why do these make sense? People start freaking out, and somebody tries to explain it. He says, brains don't brain logically. But then the coup de grace, I agree with this person, brains do brain logically, but when English doesn't logic Englishly, brain brains by itself to logic that English. Yeah? Y'all understand that, right? Yes. So not only does your brain know what to do with completely unfamiliar words in a familiar enough context, your brain also knows what to do with familiar words in completely unfamiliar contexts. You've never seen brain used as a verb before, I hope. But you get it, right? Yeah? Yes, you have a question?
I want to throw us off. Do other languages do this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, this is how, that's what I'm trying to show you, is this is how all language works. And if you have little kids, you really get this, because all the time they'll come up and they'll say something and you'll be like, well, that's not how you say that, but I know what you mean, right? Like,
It happened for my first 3 years of
yeah.
Spanish.
Yeah. You have an example, Jay?
Oh yeah.
Yeah?
Levi looked at me and went, "How did it run about us today?" And he went, and it was very clear to me
Yep.
that it was, "What is this that you're doing?"
Yeah.
Was like his question, and I answered him, and he was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
and
Yes.
but none of the syllables were actual words
Right,
or anything.
right. So let's take a second to think about what's actually happening right now. My brain is taking ideas, and it's turning those ideas into electrical impulses that are being sent to my lungs, throat, tongue, teeth, and lips, which is pushing on the air in this room to hit your eardrums, which are then sending an electrical impulse to your brain and turning that electrical impulse into understanding. I'd like to take a second and do something that you've probably never done, and just praise God that any of this works at all. This is a miracle that you understand what I'm saying right now. And it happens like that. It happens so fast. Thank you, God, that we can talk to each other. So here's the point. Here's what I'm trying to get at. Words don't mean anything. People mean things with words. And that may sound pedantic, but I think that that's an important starting point for understanding how all language works, and especially when we start getting into the idea of trying to translate one language into another, and especially when we're talking about things that we think are extremely important, like what we find in the Bible, right? It's not enough to just know what a word means, right? You have to understand what the person is saying, you know? The point of this class, we're going to work to make sure that we're understanding what people are saying. That's the idea. So, to do that, we're going to have either a paradigm shift or a paradigm creation, depending on whether or not you think about words at all or not. So, if you think about words at all, which most of you probably don't, you probably think about them in terms of a dictionary. You know? I want to try and shift that focus to what I'm going to call an encyclopedia. And I'll unpack what that means here. So if you go and you look something up in a dictionary, you're going to find 1 or 2, maybe as many as 5 little short definitions of a word. Hopefully you're already starting to see through my silly examples that that's simply not what's going on in your brain. It's way more complicated than that. Otherwise, when you hit Tolgi wood, or Englishly, your brain would just shut off because there's no dictionary entry for those, right? But that's not what happens. You can still understand what's being said. You figure it out. So instead, I want to think in terms of an encyclopedia. And if you're like me and you're like under 40, you've probably never used a physical encyclopedia. But you've probably used Wikipedia, which is very similar, right? So if I look up something in an encyclopedia or in Wikipedia, what do you find?
A whole page of different things about
Yes.
the situation or word.
Yes, you find paragraphs or sometimes like a lot of pages of information. My argument is that that's what's going on in your brain with every word in the English language all the time. And I'll prove it to you with a very simple word. It's maybe one of the first words you ever learned how to spell. It's the word run. So if you look up run in the dictionary, you're going to find something like this. Information on how to pronounce it and the different forms of the word, right? And then a couple of definitions, right? To go quickly by moving the legs more rapidly than at a walk and in such a manner that for an instant in each step all or both feet are off the ground. Or more broadly, to move with haste or quickly, right? If you're looking up run in a dictionary, this is not going to help you, right? Anyway, so the point is, right, that's probably what most of us think of when I say, this is what does run mean? Most of you all probably would have said this, right? Or some form of this. This is a very, very small fraction of what happens in our brain with this word run. And let's explore that a little bit. So I might mean to move quickly when I say run, but I could also say, I left the car running, right? Hey, I've got an announcement. I'm running for president. Yeah? I might tell one of my students, quit running your mouth, right? On Wednesday nights I run the food pantry or whatever, right? You could say I run this organization. I'm going to run to the store. I'll be back in 10 minutes. You know I'm not, right? I'm probably going to get in a vehicle, right? Okay. We could even say something like, hey, look at those vines. They're running up a trellis. That's extremely slow movement, right? And we use that word run. And we could go on. I came up with more ideas than this. This is just what would fit in a legible way, right? So this is happening with every word all the time. This is just one example. So words do not exist in isolation. They exist within the context of a language. And oftentimes that context matters as much, if not more, than the word itself. And again, if you've got little kids, you know that that's true because they'll say things like, I want, this, and you're like, oh, you mean you want chocolate milk. That's not what you said, but like, I get from the context that's what you're talking about, right? So in language theory, this concept is called semantic range. Semantic is a fancy word for meaning. Right? So the idea is words have a range of meanings, right? That could be used in any given situation. So even the simplest words can have enormous semantic ranges. In fact, usually the simpler a word is, the bigger its semantic range is, because more complex words are for like very specific situations, right? Like the medical terms that Justin uses in his office, those probably don't have a very big semantic range because you don't want to confuse something when you're in surgery, right? You got to be very clear, this is what I mean, right? And I don't mean something else. Whereas a word like run, we use constantly all the time. It can mean basically whatever we want it to, right? So as you listen, you prune semantic range to understand what the other person is saying. You think of a tree with branches coming off of it, right? All the different branches are all the different possible meanings a word could have. When you're listening, you cut those off so you understand what the other person says. So if I told you I'm going to go hop in the shower, you know instantly that no jumping is happening, right?
That's our favorite.
You prune that semantic range without even realizing that you're doing it. Yeah?
He always says, why don't you just stand there?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Also, a lot of humor is built off of the fact that semantic range exists. Yeah. And you can do things like that. And if you're fast, it's funny. Absolutely.
Chandler actually hops in the shower, so is that?
That's dangerous. He shouldn't do that. Okay. This is an important point. There are no passive parties in communication. All of you all, when you listen to me right now, you are an active participant in communication. Language is never one-sided. Yeah. Listening is active. And we'll come back to this idea in, every week we'll talk about this, the fact that all language is a partnership. But we'll come back to this idea in a couple of weeks. The more comfortable you are in a linguistic setting, the easier it is to prune semantic range. You don't always get it right. Married couples, we always understand each other? Yes. Right? No. So even in the most comfortable setting you can imagine, right? Your spouse you spend every day with, you still get it wrong sometimes. Yeah? But the further you get from those comfortable settings, the more likely it is you're going to miss something. And the harder it is to prune semantic range, to understand what somebody means. Yeah? And again, we're not really talking about it today, but when you pick up your Bible, you're listening to somebody who is thousands of years old and lived on the other side of the planet.
Speaking a different language.
Right. So we're going to need to do some work to be better partners in this communication, in this language. Today, the point I want to end on is this. Geniuses are aware of semantic range, and they'll use it on purpose to communicate multiple things at the same time. And I'm going to give a few examples of what I'm talking about. Shakespeare, obviously the king of this, right? I could have picked probably any line at random. This is from Romeo and Juliet. It's Act 3, Scene 1. Romeo's friend Mercutio, he's been stabbed in a sword fight. Romeo says, "Hey, Mercutio, how you holding up?" And Mercutio says, "Ask for me tomorrow, you shall find me a grave man." Does he mean grave as in serious? Like, Romeo, I'm done with this sword fighting business. I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to take life more seriously. Or does he mean he'll be dead, right? Grave as in tomb. And the answer is yes. Mercutio means both things. He's saying, if I make it to tomorrow, Romeo, I'm not sword fighting anymore. Yeah? This is a much more beautiful way to say that than what I just said. All right? And there's a reason that we still read Shakespeare in 2024. For a more recent example, y'all seen Hamilton? Okay. There's this line throughout the musical, "I'm not throwing away my shot." Yeah? Let me ask it this way. Is anyone not familiar with Hamilton? Not know what I'm talking about?
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
But I know.
Yeah, you know who Alexander Hamilton is. Yes. Okay. So at the beginning of the musical, he comes to the United States, and this is the optimistic catchphrase of an immigrant who's saying, I'm not going to give up my chance at a better life. Toward the middle of the show, it takes on kind of a sinister quality. He starts to sacrifice his morals. He starts to spend less time with his family. It becomes this ambitious, bitter thing that he says to defend the fact that he's kind of giving up on things that really matter for the sake of plowing forward in his pursuit of more fame, more power, more everything, right? I'm not throwing away my shot. And then, of course, at the end of the show, Hamilton dies in a duel against Aaron Burr where he literally throws away his bullet, throws away his shot. Yeah. So over the course of the musical, this one phrase has at least 3 meanings and implications, probably more if we sat down and really thought about it. Yeah. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the man who wrote Hamilton, I think he's a literary genius. He has an incredible command of semantic range in English. It's one reason I think Disney just keeps hiring him. But there you go. Remember when I promised this was a Bible class? Do you all want to read the Bible? Okay. So, we're going to take a look at just one sentence out of the book of Jonah. You guys remember Jonah? He was called to go preach to that great city, Nineveh. Goes the opposite way. It's eaten by the big fish, vomited up on land. He finally does go to Nineveh, and then we get this. Jonah began to enter into the city by the journey of one day, and cried and said, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overturned." Does he mean overturned as in like churned up, destroyed like a turtle on its back? Or does he mean turned over a new leaf?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. You're tracking. Yeah? So, whatever happens, Jonah's sermon is true. In 40 days, Nineveh's going to be overturned one way or the other. And you might be asking, Derek, what is the Wycliffe? I don't use Wycliffe Bible when I read, right? And that's because I had to do some digging to find an English translation that used the word overturned. Most of them use the word overthrown, which I think still gets there, right? You could say that means destroyed, yeah? Or like there's new management, like Yahweh's in charge now. A lot of them just say destroyed. You miss this altogether, yeah? And we will talk about translations in future weeks. But that's why I picked that one. This is the closest to what's actually happening in Hebrew. If you go to the Hebrew word, the word there, the most basic form of the word is the word turn, as in like, hey, turn left up here. Yeah. So Nineveh, a turn is going to happen of some kind. So this is what I want to end on. I've said this already, all language is a partnership. The biblical authors were literary geniuses. They were at least as good as Shakespeare or Miranda. I'm convinced of that. And they were inspired by the God who, when he speaks, the universe comes into existence. Whatever our encyclopedia is doing, it's not yet up to the task of totally understanding what's going on in the Bible. Yeah. I think that we can say that in humility and recognize that. So for the rest of this class, the next 12-ish weeks, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be developing and practicing using tools to expand our encyclopedia to try and more closely map onto the encyclopedias of the people who wrote the Bible so that we can be better partners in understanding what it is that they wrote, what it is that they're saying. That's all I've got for today. Questions? This is a lot, and it's more, at the moment, more language theory than it is scripture or theology. So I apologize for that. But again, I think we have to start here for the rest of it to make sense. Questions? Mitchell?
Share like one of my favorite examples of this.
Absolutely, yes.
This is fun. I'm playing this one off memory. I don't have my notes in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna get most of this right. It's in Judges when Jephthah. You stop me if you're
Yep.
confused this later. But Jephthah is going and capturing things. I'll just give you a little portion of it. And the Gileadites had captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites.
Mm-hmm.
And when any of the preachers of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead said to him, "Are you Ephraimite?" When he said no, then they said to him, "Say Shibboleth."
Yes.
And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At the time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell.
Yes.
And that sounds all sorts of like fun. You're like, okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But then you realize that when he's like, play with the words, Shibboleth is literally means life, like a flowing river. It's like say life.
Okay.
That's the context of that word and what it means.
Uh-huh.
And when the Ephraimites, because they have a slur in their speech and you can't pronounce that sh sound as well,
Yeah.
when they say Sibboleth, that word is completely different and actually means death.
Okay.
So they're like, hey, say life and you will live.
Yeah.
Death.
Right.
Get slaughtered.
Interesting.
So-
I didn't know about the meanings there.
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
kind of a fun little context, and they were able to discern between the two. And, like, you're literally asking for life and they get death.
Yeah. Fun fact about that, from an audio standpoint, we still call that sibilance. in English when somebody's got really hard S sounds, and there's all sorts of stuff on that fancy board in there to try and pull that down so you're not hearing somebody say this all the time. Yes, exactly.
Oh gosh, that's taking me back. There was this little old man at our church growing up.
Had that kind of
He would
whistle
get up
when he
there
would.
and lead the prayer,
Yeah.
And every word, it was like a whistle.
Yeah.
I mean, every S was a,
Yep. Yep.
you know, we're saying.
That's sibilance. It comes from that story in the Bible. What?
Can you sit back here and like fix that?
This is before
It's not quite that simple.
I was like,
This is the 1970s.
But yes, there are tools for dealing
There
with
were no
that.
fixed
Dentures
So-
were loose, probably.
What's that?
His dentures were probably loose.
Exactly.
Probably, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. They were flopping around.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
got a story. I was in a French Bible study at the Christian Student Center, and we were doing the Sermon on the Mount, and it got to happy are the meek, which we think of as wimpy. You know,
We're going to talk about that verse in a couple of weeks. Yeah, but go ahead.
Early only debonair, and the word was debonair, and I thought of Maurice.
Yeah. Oh, wearing a suit, like.
How can that possibly be the same word? And it's like you take what comes gracefully.
Yeah.
And that completely changed my. It's
Yes.
like Jesus is not saying be wimpy,
Right.
but he's saying.
Yeah. That's exactly the kind of thing that I'm getting at. So there's all, like, semantic range for everything that we read in the Bible is going to have implications like that, where you read meek and you think weak. Yeah? And maybe that's what Jesus means, but could we go back to the source and find out? That's what we're going to work on doing.
I know another funny one.
Yeah.
I was reading an old Revised Standard, or back before Revised Standard, an
Yeah.
older version of the Bible. I forget where it was, but it was where they stole. Somebody stole the Ark of the Covenant, and they were afflicted with something.
Yeah.
Most Bibles say tumors.
Yes.
This said hemorrhoids, and I thought it's hemorrhoids. And I looked it up, and that's what it was. And then they had to make golden images of this stuff. To
That's amazing.
get back. So it's like God afflicted these people with hemorrhoids, and then
they had to make
hemorrhoids.
little golden, yeah.
Another thing. Yeah, so I
Not that, I mean, that's not any less gross than tumors.
yeah,
Yeah, it is.
Okay, fine.
but so I learned God has a great sense of humor.
Yeah. Jay, did you have something?
Wow.
One of the things that, as I've like looked back at any different language, but especially ancient languages, is
Yep.
our dictionary is absolutely massive
Yes.
compared to theirs.
Yes.
Like we have so many different words for like we might have 10, 20, 30 words for their one word. And semantic range between our 30 words and their one word is every bit as broad as you can absolutely imagine it to be.
Right.
Where you get tumors and hemorrhoids as different, same
Right.
word, different meaning, could be both, could
Yep.
be neither, could be something completely different.
And one makes us like squirm and the other makes us chuckle, right? They're essentially the same thing,
Yeah.
but yeah, they've got different feeling to them,
The
for sure.
reverse is also true though. Like sometimes we abuse one of our words, whereas they have like multiple.
Yes, love is a great example of that.
Love is a great example.
Yep.
We use love for pizza. We use love for wife. They
Yeah.
have, like,
And I better not mean the same thing.
Yeah.
or one of those is grossly out of
Tune.
out of tune. Thank you. Let me give you all. Let me speak to something real quick here. So in Genesis, is it 11? I believe the Tower of Babel. There's this little note at the beginning where it says, "Now all the people of the world had the same language and the same words." And you're looking at that in English and going, why did they say that twice, right? In Hebrew, what they're saying there is the same language, and the same dabar is the Hebrew word for word. It does mean word. It could just as easily mean like matter or subject. So when somebody has a problem, they'll go to discuss the debar with the king, right? Which is funny because what it actually will say in Hebrew there, they go to debar the debar with the king, right? And they're like slightly different forms, but it's the same word. The idea there is what we're talking about here. They had the same words. They all thought in the same terms. They had the same frame of mind. Yeah? And this, the story of Babel, they all get spread or whatever. But the point is, like, we have a different debar than the people who wrote the Bible. And we can do our part to try and figure out, hey, what was their debar? And maybe there's something where when we meet the people who wrote the Bible one day, we'll have something to teach them, maybe. I'm not saying like we all need to learn Hebrew because it's a better language. I'm saying the Bible was written in Hebrew and Greek. So we need to do our part to kind of learn how they thought. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
I think it's difficult. Like, I haven't done this very much. Like looking up. I've just since you kind of started bringing it up fairly recently, I started like comparing things.
Yeah.
But there's so many words that are translated differently or maybe slightly out of context.
Yep.
I have difficulty figuring out which words do I need to look up to figure out the context, and like maybe
Yes.
it's all of them. So
Yes.
it's like as I'm reading the Bible, I do look up literally every single word.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
So-
it's difficult. How do you choose?
I was talking before you got here. In a few weeks, we're going to start using Logos Bible software, which is an interlinear tool. Which means that you've got the English, and then right under it, you've got Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic or whatever, right? And so I've gotten to the point with this that I don't want to read the Bible without that because so often I'll be looking at something and be like, oh, that's what it says. And the more I do it, the more I start to recognize. And we'll talk about that in weeks to come. Not everybody has to do this. I don't think, like I said, I'm not trying to imply that you've misunderstood the Bible at all. But I think that some Christians absolutely do need to be doing this because we're going to see stuff that other people won't and be able to kind of correct and inform and all of that.
Thinking that people, because I grew up there, King James, that's the way to go. And it's
Yes.
like you study on that foreign language for 1 hour and you go, oh, right. No,
Yes,
never mind.
exactly. Yes. The classic comeback is, yeah, if King James was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, right? It's like,
Jesus and King James, they were.
yeah, they were tight. Well, who am I to say if they were buds or not? Jay?
One of the things that I have found helpful, and maybe we'll this Jeremy and some others, or maybe not in some other ways, but is to think about what question the authors are asking or answering.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, different cultures have different driving questions. So for example, the Romans, they're in many ways, their whole culture and society turned on the question of what is powerful, or how can I get power, or some way, whereas the Greek culture, especially in pre-Roman times, centered around like what is true or what is real. For the Jewish culture, particularly at the time of Jesus, it was like, where is or who is God with? Those are three, sometimes similar, sometimes very different questions, and really changes the encyclopedia that you're using and how you're using it. And Logos, I've seen my brother use it a lot, is really great for kind of helping contextualize words and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then you can look in and be like, what question is this author answering? Who are they addressing? What's the audience? What is that audience's question?
Yeah.
Like for Americans, in a lot of ways, our question is like, what's it worth? Or what's the value? Or what's it worth to you even. And so like that in many ways drives like from the very basement like foundation of what's going on. And so when you learn to ask the questions that are being asked or being answered by the authors, it helps you discern maybe which words are being used. And these authors have semantic range, and so they're answering it maybe for a variety of different people. Like the Gospel of John in particular is like has a huge range. So
Yeah.
sorry if I stole something.
No, you're fine.
I was gonna ask before that was a really good way to do it, but the whole lot of this class is bound to be about culture
Yes.
itself, you know.
Yes. We're jumping the gun a little bit, but yes, we're going to get to a point where we talk about the fact that language is inseparable from culture by its very nature. We'll talk about that. Yeah. I want to end on one point just to kind of preemptively maybe dispel any confusion. I'm going to talk a lot about the biblical authors, the people who wrote and or compiled the Bible in the form that we have it today. I don't want anyone to think I'm doing that to the exclusion of the inspiration of the Spirit. I don't know about y'all, but my personal history, through simply not thinking about it, I used to do the opposite, where I would think of the Bible as being inspired by God to the exclusion of the human element, right? We don't think the Bible fell out of heaven. The Mormons think that, right? These golden tablets came down and were given to Joseph Smith, right? We think that the Spirit came on people, and then they were able to write in ways that no human being has a right to be able to do. Yeah, and we're over time, but as a quick example of what I'm talking about, when you read about the Spirit at work in the Bible, what you see is a human doing something in full control of themselves and their faculties, right, that they should not be able to do. Think of Samson, for example, right? The Holy Spirit came powerfully upon Samson, and he did what?
Pull down the temple.
Okay, destroys a building with his bare hands. Or he does what?
That, yeah.
Okay. Kills 1,000 people with a donkey jawbone, right? You shouldn't be able to do that. But when the Spirit is on Samson, he does. There's this guy named Oholiab. He's less famous than Samson. But in the book of Exodus, it says that the Spirit of the Lord was on him to work with gold and with fine cloth and all this stuff. And he builds the tabernacle, a house fit for God to live in, right? It's so beautiful and so perfect and so well designed. The Spirit was at work through him to do that, right? But it's not like Samson or Oholiab fell into a trance and woke up and went, oh, all my enemies are dead. Oh, there's the tabernacle, right? And I think if we don't actually think about it, we fall into this place of thinking somebody fell into a trance, woke up and, oh, it's the Gospel of John, right?
Just magically.
Right. No, John knew what he was doing. I don't think he knew everything that he was doing. But is a partnership, a divine and human partnership. And we can't ignore this element. I think that the Spirit is at work on this end too. And when you pick up the Bible, God is helping you understand it. But we can do some work on our end to be better partners here. All right. Yes, Mitchell.
Do you make mention that there is a free version of Logos that you can go download if you want to?
Absolutely, yes. And in 2 or 3 weeks when we start using it, I will show you all how to do that and how to get it. Yeah.
And they give a free book every month, so you might as well give the free version of free books.
Yes. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
The red button there, Jay.